At the end of this video, this is the result that you will have. Your plane will be able to boost in one direction according to the gas it has, and it can also shoot. Hey, I'm Max and welcome to part 2 of the plane shooter game. Today we're gonna add spacebar to increase our speed, like a nitro boost, and click to shoot. Before we do that, we have to make the camera follow the player so we can move around more than in this little square. A simple solution to do that would be to move the camera as a child of the plane, but the problem if we do that is that it's going to follow it very closely, and also when we rotate, it rotates it, and obviously we don't want that. So instead of doing this, we're going to create a script on the camera to make it follow the plane, and we can even add a little offset so you can see more in front of the plane than behind. So let's go in our script folder, create a C# script, call it camera follow, or whatever you want, and let's open it up. First, I'm going to create a reference of the player controller so I can access the position of the plane and its movement. This variable here is going to be set in the editor so we don't have to do anything in start. Technically, we could do something like player controller is equal find object of type player controller, but I find that it's easier to set it in editor and you have less chance of conflict or errors. Then in the update method, since we want it to happen every frame, we're going to set the position of the camera to the position of the player. To do that, we just have to do transform.position, which is going to be the position of the camera, is equal to player controller.transform.position, which is going to set it exactly to the position of the player. Let's try it out. Don't forget to go on your camera, put the script on it, so camera follow in my case, and to drag the player plane into the player controller area. Okay, so now if we try this out, we're gonna see a little problem, and it's that everything is working fine, like the camera is following our player, but we can't see anything. Now this might confuse you, and it actually did for me for a couple seconds, but it's because the camera is at -10Z, and then when we set it to the position of the player, it gets set to 0Z. So we just need to set the camera Z to -10. So here in the code, instead of setting it to the position of the player, we can just create a new vector tree, set it to position of the player X, position of the player Y, and then -10 for Z. Let's try this out. And now as you can see, the camera is following our plane perfectly. But now I can already see a problem, and it's that our mouse input only gets updated when we move it, so if we stop moving it but the plane moves, it changes where it is in the world and it makes it look weird and not go to your cursor. Let's see how it looks. As you can see, if I stop moving my mouse, it goes to where it was instead of where it is, and it creates this weird effect. So let's fix this. Okay, so the reason why our plane is following our mouse but it's not doing it right when the camera follows it is because we set the mouse pause to the screen position of our mouse position. But as you can see, this uses the camera as the position to do the transform from the screen to the world. So we actually need to do this every time we calculate the direction instead of just when we move the mouse. So here we can remove the camera main screen to world point and just leave the read value, and instead we'll put it here. But as you can see, this is a vector tree. When we do screen to world point, it gives us a vector tree. So just like the other one, we have to do a new vector 2 and put in the position X and Y. So here the X and .Y. Let's test this out. And now if I stop moving my mouse, it keeps going in the same direction. Great. The next feature we're gonna add is make it so when we press space, it makes us go faster and boosts our plane. So if you want to do that, go in actions in your input action in your asset, add a new action and call it boost. And here in the binding, you just have to search for, in the path, search for space, keyboard, and using control scheme, keyboard and mouse. Now you can save this and exit. Go on your plane object, go in player input, events, player, and here in the boost we just created, you add an event and drag your player in, and now we can make the function that it's gonna call. Okay, now go in your player controller script, Add a private bool boosting, which is going to represent if we are currently boosting or not, and add a public void boost, and as the other one above, input action callback context. And in this one we'll just do if context dot cancel, which means if the key was released, we will do boosting equals false, because when we release the key we want to stop boosting, and otherwise we want to set boosting to true. Now we can save this and go into our actions for our player input, and in boost we just have to select player controller and then boost. But for now our boost doesn't do anything. Even if boosting is true, it doesn't do anything. So to make boosting make your plane go faster, you just have to do if boosting and then an else statement, and you just have to put the RB at force in each one, but in the boosting one you do ×2. Okay, now let's add a gas tank so we can't boost forever. We'll just do a private float gas, and we'll make it start at 100, and then when we're boosting we'll do gas minus minus, so it reduces 1, and else we'll do gas plus plus, so it goes up when we stop boosting. Or actually that's probably gonna be too fast, so let's do 0.5 and plus equals 0.5, so it goes a bit slower so we can have more gas. Let's not forget here to make it so we go faster if we're boosting and our gas is greater than 0. That way if we run out of gas it will go in the else statement and make us go at normal speed. Let's also make it here so when we run out of gas and it goes into the else statement, it sets our boosting to false, because otherwise it's just going to keep bouncing between the two and it's not going to feel very natural. Let's try this out. Okay, so here I am not boosting. Now I'm boosting, and am I going to run out of gas? Okay, so it looks like I ran out of gas. Now I'll release the key. And there you go, I'm not boosting anymore, and now I am. And I should run out of gas faster this time. And there you go, I'm out of gas. And if I try pressing it over and over, you can see I keep stopping because I run out of gas. So this is working, but we can't see how much we have, so we need to add a UI. To do this, we just go on our main camera, right click, UI, and then we'll set a text for now, but we can also add a bar later. So the canvas is going to be much bigger than your camera. See, this is my camera and my player way down there, and my canvas is way bigger. That's normal. That's just the way Unity shows things. So now I'll make my text bigger, and I'll just set it to, let's say 100 over 100 by default. I'll make it 35 size font, and I'll set the color to, let's say, yellow for gas, and I'll put it at the top left. Now I will create a C# script for the UI. I'll just call it UI and open it up. Okay, in the UI we will need to use unityengine.ui, so just import that using the using. And now we can create our public text gas text, and we also need a public player controller instance, and in the update here we just have to do gas text is equal to player controller gas. Oh, but our gas is private, so we just have to set this to public, and just to be cleaner I'll move it at the top with the other public one. So now that it's public, I should be able to get the gas. Yep. And then I'll just add plus and then over 100. Now I can add the UI to my camera and put in the text for the gas and the player controller, which is on the player plane. Now as you can see, when I'm boosting it's going down, and then when I'm not boosting anymore it goes up. So it works, but it looks very weird. First of all, I noticed the big problem is that our gas keeps going up and it doesn't stop at 100. So we'll do here if gas is lower than 100, then we add. Second, here in our UI class we just display the gas with no limit. So that means when the gas is something like 95.000001, it's going to show that. So that's way too big. We just want to have the big number, so we'll do .toString and in parentheses F0, so that means 0 decimals. Let's see how that looks now. Okay, so now it doesn't go over 100, and if we press gas we can see that it doesn't show the decimals anymore, and when I reach 0 it stops, and if I press it again it goes down again. It makes me faster, so that's working fine. Now let's add the minigun to the player and try to make him shoot. So to do that I'll just drag my minigun as a child of my player. I'll set the order in layer to 1 so we can see it, and I'll change the pixel per unit to something like 3000. Let's see how that looks. That looks fine. And now I'll move it so it's under the plane right here. There you go. And since the minigun is now a child of the plane, if I move the plane, it moves with it, and even if I rotate the plane, the minigun is going to rotate with it. Okay, now let's grab the bullet and drag it into our scene. I'll set the pixel per unit to this one to 4000, see how that looks. That's a big, but I guess that will work for this tutorial. Now let's create a script for our projectile so we can calculate the speed and when we need to delete it, and also if there's collisions. I'll just call it projectile and open it up. For now, all I'll do is make it delete itself after 5 seconds to make sure it doesn't create a bunch of bullets and that they never delete themselves, because that's going to cause a lot of lag. So let's do a private float timer or delete timer. In the start method, I'll set my delete timer to time.time, which is the current time, plus 5, so it's in seconds, so I add 5 seconds. And in the update method, we want to do if delete timer is smaller than time.time, then we want to destroy the game object linked to the projectile. So what that does is pretty much set the timer to the time plus 5 seconds, and then when it gets smaller than that time, that means 5 seconds has passed, so then it deletes it. Put it on a bullet, so that means if we start the game, the bullet will destroy itself after 5 seconds. I also want to give this bullet a rigid body 2D so I can make it move, and I'll actually disable the gravity for it because I don't want the bullet to curve in its path. And I'll also give it a capsule collider to calculate the collisions when we get there. So for this capsule collider, I'll set it to horizontal, and I'll make it more or less the right shape. That looks pretty good. Now we have to make a new folder to keep this clean. We will call this folder prefabs, and we will drag the bullet inside, and what that does is create a prefab of that bullet. So now we can delete this in the scene and keep just a prefab, and if we drag it in, you'll see it creates a copy of the bullet with the projectile, the rigid body, and the capsule collider. So now what we want to do is make it so when we click, a bullet prefab is spawned at the tip of the gun and shot in the direction of the plane. To do that, we will create this empty game object on the plane, and we'll call it shoot point. And we just have to set it to where we want the bullets to spawn. So I'll set it at the tip of the barrel here. Now we go into a player controller and we do a public void fire with our input action dot callback context. And this is going to be called when we left click by default, since in our input action we have fire set to left click. Now we have to add a public game object bullet prefab, which is where we're going to put the prefab in the editor. And just for now, just to test, we'll just create the bullet but not give it any speed or anything, just to test it out. So I'll do instantiate, which is what you do when you want to create something with a prefab. Then I'll put the bullet prefab, and then I have to put the parent or the position. Now here I don't want the bullet to be a child of the plane, because that means if the plane rotates or moves, the bullet is going to follow it, but the bullet is supposed to be independent of the plane once it's shot. So I actually want to do transform.position, and here I don't want to give it any rotation, so I'll just do quaternion.identity, which means no rotation, and that way it's not going to be a child of the plane. If I just put here transform, then it would be a child of the plane, but we don't want that. So here I'll save that, I'll go into Unity, and I'll make sure to go into the player controller and put the bullet prefab in the editor. Also, don't forget to go into Events, Player, and then in Fire here you add a new function. You drag the plane in, and you go into Player Controller and Fire. So now let's test it out, see if it works. So when I click, as you can see, it creates a bunch of bullets, but you actually can't see them because they are not in the right order layer, I think. But as you can see, they delete themselves after 5 seconds. So let's fix the ordering layer. Just go in your prefab, click it once, and now you can see here everything about your prefab. And let's set the ordering layer to 1. And now let's see if we can see them. Yep, so as you can see, we can see them, but they act kind of weird because they don't have a speed, and also because they can interact with the plane. So as you can see, our plane is hitting them, and they are bouncing off, and they are also slowing down the plane and making it move weirdly. So we actually need to disable the collisions between the plane, at least our plane, and the bullets. So the bullets don't actually need real collisions because they just need to know when they hit something. So we can go in the Capsule Collider 2D and set it to isTrigger. And what that's going to do is make it so they can actually go through everything, and the only thing that's going to do is if it hits something, it's going to send a message and trigger a method. So we want to use that trigger to know when we hit something and damage that plane. Now let's see with trigger how it goes. So if I shoot, it shouldn't make me move weirdly anymore, and as you can see, they don't shoot anymore, they don't move, and they delete themselves after 5 seconds. So now all we have left to do is add a public transform to make sure that we shoot them at the right point. So I'll call it shoot point, and here instead of transform.position, I just do shoot point.position, and I want to give the bullet some movement. So I'll do game object bullet equals to instantiate, so that's going to give me an instance of the bullet I just created, and I'll just do bullet.getComponent rigid body 2D, and here I'll do .add force with the speed of the plane. So the faster the plane goes, the faster the bullet's gonna go. So I'll do RB, which is the rigid body of the plane, .velocity, and here I'd actually want the bullet to go a bit faster than the plane, obviously. So I'll do something like ×5, and let's see how that looks. And then since I want this force to be instant, I'll actually do force mode 2D.impulse. Let's not forget to set our shoot point into our editor, and let's see how that looks. Okay, so as you can see, the bullets are actually firing off at a pretty good speed. I'm pretty surprised I got that right. Now let's make it so the bullets destroy themselves when they hit the ground. So I actually want to make the bullets destroy themselves when they hit anything except the player, because they're gonna spawn on the player, so they don't want to delete on spawn, and you don't want the player to be able to hit himself. So what I'll do is go into player, go at the top in layer, I'll do add layer, and I'll add a layer called player, and then I'll go back on the player and set it to the layer player. And here I actually do change children, doesn't matter. Now I want to go on the bullet prefab and do the same thing. So I'll add a layer, I'll call it bullet, or maybe like player bullet, because we want the enemy bullets to be able to hit the player. And then I'll go on bullet and I'll set it to player bullet, and I'll actually rename my prefab to make sure this works. This is not too confusing. So player bullet, and just to make sure it's still on my plane. Yeah, it's still there. And now what we have to do is edit, project settings, go into physics 2D, and at the bottom here we want to uncheck player bullet player. You also want to prevent the player bullets from hitting the player bullets. Now we want to go in our projectile and add a void on trigger enter 2D, and it fills it up for me, but if it doesn't for you, just copy this. And when the bullet collisions with something, we want to destroy it, just like when it runs out of time. Okay, so now if we test it out, we'll see that it's pretty buggy, and it doesn't always delete, and sometimes it goes through the ground. Now the big reason for this is because the ground is using an edge collider, so if the bullet is moving fast, it can easily go through without getting detected. So we will actually remove that and use a box collider instead. With this it works a lot better with the box collider, and as you can see, it deletes when it hits the ground, or 5 seconds after if it doesn't. Now this code here works fine if we just want to fire once, but we actually want to fire repeatedly for as long as we hold the key. So we'll do similar as boosting, we'll do shooting, a bull shooting, and here we'll do pretty much the same as here. So if context is cancelled, we'll set shooting to false, else to true. And here we will copy that code over, we don't need that anymore. And in the fixed update we can just do if shooting, then we want to shoot. But that is going to make us shoot once every fixed update. We don't want to shoot that fast necessarily. So we will add a private float shoot timer. And similar to the projectile timer, we'll set it at the start to time.time plus 1 or 0.5. And every time we shoot, we want to set it back at 0.5 after time. And we'll do here if shoot timer is less than time.time, we can shoot. And now for as long as I'm holding the key, it's shooting twice a second, and if I stop holding it, it stops shooting. So we have our shooting pretty much done. The only thing we could do is rotate the bullet. We will just go here in the shooting code, and instead of spawning it with no angle, so instead of quaternon.identity, we'll just do transform.rotation. And actually here, instead of using the velocity, it's much better to use the direction of the plane, because sometimes the plane will be looking one way but maybe drifting and flying another way, so it would look weird if we use the velocity. And there you go, the angle is working, but now that I changed it from velocity to direction, it's way too slow. So let's increase the speed to something like 30. 30 is much better, and as you can see now the bullet is in the right angle and it's always flying out from the plane. So there you go, in this episode we added boosting, shooting, and collisions with the bullets. In the next episode we can make the map scroll so we never run out of map, and we can add enemies and we can add them shooting at us and we can shoot at them to destroy them. So make sure to subscribe if you want to see the rest.